So we got Conor Benn taking on Samuel Vargas this weekend. I believe Conor Benn is topping that particular card. Yes, he is. You've also got Savannah Marshall on the undercard, Shannon Courtney versus Ebony Bridges, Alexander Espinoza versus Cash Farouk, Nick Campbell versus Peter oh God, I can't pronounce that surname. John Hedges also on the undercard. But yeah, I'm here to talk about Conor Benn versus Samuel Vargas. But before I do, I briefly want to respond to people who asked for my take on Ricky Hatton's son making his pro debut on the Dylan White Povetkin undercard. Ricky Hatton's son had a similar number of amateur fights, as far as I'm aware, as Conor Benn. Now, people progress at different rates. You can't just look at everybody on their debut and say, okay, this person's going to be a world champion, this person's going to fail. Doesn't work like that. But it is a fair comparison in terms of what they look like on their debuts. Doesn't mean that Ricky Hatton's son can't go anywhere, and I'm calling him Ricky Hatton's son because I've actually already forgotten his first name. No disrespect. But I'm not saying Ricky Hatton's son can't go anywhere or whatever the case may be. But his debut was far less impressive than Conor Benn's debut. Again, similar number of amateur fights. Not that Conor Benn looked amazing, but he maintained his shape much better. His punches looked better. His feet looked better. His athleticism was superior. Just everything about Conor Benn. This is his debut, by the way, against Boyanov, right? He just looked way better than Ricky Hatton's son looked. Ricky Hatton's son looked extremely raw, extremely novice-y. His chin was as high up in the air as it could possibly be. And that was even noted by the commentators, certainly on the DAZN broadcast that I watched. His chin was just unbelievably high up in the air. So there's an awful lot of work to do. And by the way, when Conor Benn turned pro, after his first couple fights, there was a tremendous amount of skepticism from people. Even I was skeptical to a certain degree. Now, if they were skeptical about a guy who looked like this on his debut, the skepticism, logically speaking, should be 2 or 3 or 4 times as high when you're looking at Ricky Hatton's son's debut. Because again, with a similar amount of experience, he looked far worse than Conor Benn. So that's what I'll say about Ricky Hatton's son. What is Ricky Hatton's son's name? Forgive me, folks. But I did watch the fight. I didn't want to say anything at the time because I don't want to be one of these people who just bashes the son of a famous fighter. Because there's a lot of people like that. There's a lot of envious, little crab in a bucket type people in society where just because someone like Conor Benn or Eubank Jr. or Ricky Hatton's son grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth, they want to write them off and say, oh, he's never going to do anything. He's only being talked about because of who his dad is and all this kind of business. I don't have that kind of mentality. If someone is getting in there to fight, it's not like they're just living off their dad's name and not putting any work in. Not getting in there and grafting in the gym, sparring, running, training, fighting, right? Because if there's someone that's just literally trying to live off their dad's money, sponging off their dad and not doing anything about it, okay, that's somebody who, you know, if they're in a prominent position within a company through nepotism or whatever, rather than hard work, I get it. Why someone might think, I don't really rate this person. But when you see the likes of a Eubank Jr., the likes of a Conor Benn, oh, maybe they do get opportunities. But if they're not good enough, they're not going to be able to seize these opportunities. Do you understand? So I don't want to be one of these people that just has a go at someone just because they've got a famous dad, basically. I want to judge them on their own merit. And with Conor Benn, he has come through and he's put the work in. He's been in tough fights. He showed plenty of heart. And this is a kid who did grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. But at the end of the day, if it's in you to be a warrior, it's in you. Doesn't matter whether you grew up in a mansion or whether you grew up in a slum. There are some people that grew up in slums. They ain't got the heart. They ain't got the tenacity. They ain't got the work ethic. And there are obviously plenty of people who grew up in slums that do. But at the same time, there are some people who grew up with a silver spoon like Conor Benn, who they've got the tenacity, they got the heart, they got the work ethic, they got the toughness. So that's why I don't want to come across and give people the wrong impression that I'm one of these kind of people criticizing Ricky Hatton's son just because he's Ricky Hatton's son. Oh God, look at him getting an opportunity he shouldn't be getting. I don't want to come across as one of them kind of people because I'm not like that. But just being objective, looking at his performance, it wasn't impressive, to say the least. Again, even if you compare it to Conor Benn. So anyway, moving on to Conor Benn versus Sammy Vargas. It's the right kind of fight, I think, for Conor Benn. He's now moving into world level. Samuel Vargas is a gatekeeper type of fighter. He's, I guess you could say, a fringe contender. Some people might even be of the mind to say that he's a journeyman or a high-level journeyman. I want to say fringe contender, maybe. He's been in there with a lot of big names. So, for example, Errol Spence back in 2015, he was stopped in 4 rounds. Danny Garcia, 2016, he was stopped in 7. Of course, the Amir Khan fight in 2018, where he dropped Khan in that fight, lost on points. Louis Collazo. And most recently, he was stopped by Virgil Ortiz in 7 rounds last year. I didn't actually see that fight. It's never good, though, when a fighter is coming off a stoppage loss. So he's been around, been in there with some top fighters, been stopped a few times, 3 times out of his 6 losses. Looking at them when they were face-to-face, Conor Benn appears to be the bigger guy, although that might be deceptive. You know, you have to see them in the ring to really know. But Conor Benn has always seemed like a pretty small welterweight and always grown into the weight. And he's, I'm sure, bigger now than he was when he first started his professional career. A bit tighter at the weight now because he's, filled out more. But he still appears to be a fairly small welterweight. Although he looks broader in the shoulders and stuff like that than Samuel Vargas. Samuel Vargas is someone that has relatively narrow shoulders. Some people are like that. Golovkin's like that, by the way. Golovkin is a guy who, he's a solid middleweight, but he's got quite narrow shoulders. He's not like a Danny Jacobs, big, broad coat hanger shoulders and stuff like that. Golovkin, quite a narrow-shouldered guy, but still solid. Golovkin, when he fights at middleweight, what's he coming into the ring at? Well over 170 pounds. So just because someone has got narrow shoulders doesn't mean they're necessarily a small person at the weight. Samuel Vargas has been, if we look at his career, fighting at welterweight since the very beginning. That seems to indicate that he is pretty solid at the weight, that he's not particularly small. He's even fought some fights here at junior middleweight. Sammy Vargas, he doesn't have the athleticism of Conor Benn. I don't think he really has the boxing skills of Conor Benn. If Conor Benn decides to box, use his jab, which is becoming a really good tool for him, I don't really think he has the boxing skills of Benn. But the experience, the wiliness, the mentality, there is the opportunity there for him to take advantage of a Conor Benn who's maybe a bit over-eager, who maybe overcommits to some of his shots and is a bit reckless in terms of his positioning and throwing himself off balance, which is something his dad used to do a lot. Overcommit to shots and leave himself off balance. A lot of that was to do with emotion. When Nigel Benn, Conor's dad, was fighting a routine defense, he was actually quite neat and tidy. He wasn't that wild. But when he was in there with someone who, in his words, put the fear of God in him, that's when you'd see a lot more wild swings and just reckless fighting from Nigel Benn. I mean, if you look at the Eubank rematch, Nigel Benn was far more calm going into that fight, far less emotional than he was going into the first fight. And he fought a pretty technical fight in the Eubank rematch. He was quite technical. That fight never really caught fire. So with Nigel Benn, he could be technical and box. He wasn't always fire and brimstone like in the Gerald McClellan fight or the first Eubank fight or so many other Nigel Benn fights. Nah, he could box. And with Conor Benn, I think it's the same. So if his emotions are in check and he's just going out there to be cool, calm, and collected, then I think he should be able to deal with Samuel Vargas fairly well. Vargas is somewhat sneaky, and we saw that in the Amir Khan fight, where Khan seemed to have things under control, but Vargas, who had tried that right hand in the same way several times previously, was finally able to get it through against Amir Khan. In fact, what round was that where he dropped Khan? And you could feel it coming as well. When he dropped Amir Khan in that fight, you could feel it coming. Khan was down late in the second. But after that first round, and even when he dropped Vargas in the fight, you could just sense that this story wasn't over. Vargas was going to do something. You often get that feeling in the Amir Khan fights, to be fair. And Vargas did do something. So, yeah, he's somewhat sneaky. He's a vet. I don't think his power should be that much of an issue for Conor Benn. I'm not saying he can't hurt Conor Benn, but I suspect Conor Benn's probably been hit harder than Samuel Vargas is going to be able to hit him. That's my suspicion. So, yeah, I see a victory for Conor Benn here. If he keeps his head and is calm, I think it should be a fairly comfortable victory. But there is opportunity there for Sam Vargas. If he can maybe get under Conor Benn's skin a little bit. I know he's not really that kind of character, but in the ring, if he can draw him into a fight, then that's going to give Samuel Vargas more of a chance, I think. Conor Benn likes to swing big, wide hooks at times when he gets in that battle zone like his dad used to. And Vargas's shots, I think, can be shorter in situations like that, where he's getting Conor Benn to stop cranking these big, wide hooks. Vargas can punch in between them shots and maybe just outmaneuver him on the inside a little bit if Conor Benn gets wild and reckless. But either way, I'm anticipating Conor Benn's going to have enough to win this fight. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.